This video is on how to identify the sides of a right triangle. So if you have a right triangle and you're asked to find the sides of it, to identify the sides, so you have an A, a B, and a C, they'll always give you an angle. So it's always in relation to an angle. Of course, you have the right angle and then another angle. And for this one, we'll use this angle. Most of the time they use a Greek letter called a theta to represent a missing angle. So this will be angle theta. Okay, and we say, okay, in relation to angle theta, which side is the opposite? Which side is the adjacent? And which side is the hypotenuse? Okay, to do the hypotenuse, what we want to do is find the right angle. Okay, so to find the hypotenuse of a right triangle, we find the right angle and we draw an arrow right through it. That arrow will point at the hypotenuse. So for this example, the hypotenuse is C. So to find the hypotenuse, here's the steps. To find the hypotenuse. And step 1, locate the right angle. Step 2, draw an arrow through the middle of it. And that arrow will point at the hypotenuse. So that arrow will point at the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is the only side that does not depend on the angle that we're looking for or that we're talking about. So for this one, the hypotenuse is C, and then the adjacent and opposite are going to depend on this angle theta. All right, so let's do the opposite first. To find the opposite, you're going to draw an arrow through the middle of the angle that they're talking about. So it's just like the hypotenuse, only you're not using the right angle. You're going to use the angle that they're talking about. So for this one, we're talking about angle theta here. Draw an arrow through it, and it's going to point at the opposite. So we're going to draw an arrow through angle theta. It points at the opposite. Another way to think of it is the opposite is the only side that doesn't make the angle we're talking about. So if we look at our angle here, side B and C make that angle. Side A is not part of that angle, so it's the opposite. And then the adjacent is the only side that's left. So for this, it's side B. So the adjacent is the only side left. Okay, another way to think of it is the adjacent is the side that makes the angle and is not the hypotenuse. Because you'll always have one side that makes the angle, or one side that's the hypotenuse and one side that's not the hypotenuse that makes the angle. The adjacent's the side that's not the hypotenuse. Alright, so for our example up here, the opposite of theta is going to be side A, the adjacent side B, and the hypotenuse is side C. Okay, so let's do another one. We'll do an example. Okay, so I have a right triangle. Looks like this. Here's my right angle. This is going to be side A. This is going to be side B. This is going to be side C. And I have two angles. Okay, so this angle will be angle theta. And this angle will be angle Y. Okay, so let's start with angle theta. The question is, what is the opposite side of theta? What is the adjacent for side theta? And what is the hypotenuse? Okay, so let's start with the hypotenuse. It's going to be the side opposite the right angle. So I'm going to draw an arrow through the right angle. So it's side A. And this opposite side of theta is the side opposite this angle. So the arrow's pointing at B. So it's side B. And the adjacent side is the only other side left. So it's C. Okay, so what if we want to do, instead of the opposite side of theta, what if we wanted to do the opposite side of Y? So we're going to do opposite side of Y. We're going to do the adjacent side of Y. And then the hypotenuse. Okay, so the opposite side of Y on this one is going to be side C. See, it changes depending on what angle they're talking about. And then the adjacent side of Y is going to be side A. And the hypotenuse never changes. So actually then the adjacent couldn't be side A. Let's change this. The adjacent to Y is going to be side B. And the hypotenuse is always A. It doesn't change depending on the angle. So if we notice, the opposite of our first angle is the adjacent of our second, and the adjacent of our first angle is the opposite of our second. Okay, let's try one more. Do example 2. Okay, so here I have a right triangle. I have ABC, and this time we're not talking about the sides. We have these are the vertices of our triangle. Here's our right angle, and we're looking for the side opposite adjacent to angle C. So angle C is our target angle. Okay, so I'm going to draw a line. First we'll find the hypotenuse. I'm going to draw right through B. The hypotenuse is side AC. And then the opposite is going to be side AB. And then the adjacent is the other side that's not the hypotenuse. So it's side BC. It's the side that makes the angle that's not the hypotenuse. So it's going to be BC. It's very important for what we're going to be doing later on in the year that you be able to identify the hypotenuse and the opposite and the adjacent of a given angle.